So
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Schellenfeld with the International Grief Institute, and this is Moments of Hope. Before I introduce tonight's guest, I just want to share a super cool class that starts next week. It is called Celestial Conversations, and the instructor is a Louise Hay certified instructor, Loanne Mayer. And the class is it's a 3-class workshop about how to do transpersonal journaling with your deceased loved one. So super cool. To learn more about it and sign up and join us next Tuesday night, go to university.internationalgriefinstitute.com. And for those of you that struggle with winter blues, join me and 20 of my dear friends next March for the Journeys of Hope cruise. We leave Cape Canaveral on March 3rd. And over 20 top grief experts are banding together to offer healing and hope to those who've lost a loved one. And I'm super excited about it. It's my very first cruise. I will be presenting a couple different workshops, and those who join us will have access to over 25 different workshops. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So join us. You can learn more there on my website, lindafeld.com. So tonight's guest is Dave Roberts. Dave, welcome to the show.
thank you, Linda.
It's good to have you here. And so for our viewers, Dave is a psychology professor there in New York, and you are also an addiction specialist. But what we're talking about tonight, and we're not going to sugarcoat it, we're going to go there, is losing a loved one to cancer. Specifically, you lost your daughter, Janine, in 2003. She was 18 years old, and she died from a rare form of cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma. Is that close?
That's as close enough for government work, Linda.
Yeah. Yeah. So first off, I'm sorry for the loss of your daughter.
Thank you.
It's losing a loved one to cancer is a different type of journey than a traumatic sudden loss, like in a car accident or a suicide or a homicide. You literally watch your loved one dwindle away before your eyes. And so take us back there. How old was Janine when she was diagnosed? What were her symptoms? How did you know something was wrong?
Well, she had injured her foot in September of 2001. It was a freak accident. She injured her foot. Her foot swelled up, and we thought it was just basically a result of the injury. And so she did a lot of conservative treatment, a walking boot, elevating her foot, and the swelling did not subside. So eventually it was determined that an MRI be done. So they did an MRI. They found an undefined 8-centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot. They biopsied it, and they thought it was suggestive of cancer. And on May 20, this was all happened in May. On May 26th, and this was a week after I just completed my requirements for my master's in social work degree at SUNY Albany, she was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a connective muscle tissue cancer. Her primary site was in the bottom of her right foot. And with sarcomas, Linda, they're very rare. At the time, there was about 2,500 new sarcomas diagnosed in the United States every year, which was a small percentage of the new cancers that were diagnosed every year. My understanding is that
she was diagnosed.
Excuse me.
She was 16?
She was 18 when she was diagnosed.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, because she was 18 when she was diagnosed. She was born in 84. She had just turned 7. Yeah, she was 18. I still sometimes get dates confused with us. So, because even after 16 years, it's emotional for me to tell the story. So sometimes I still get the dates kind of run into each other. But she had been diagnosed. She was diagnosed. The diagnosis was confirmed on April 26th. We went to the Dana-Farber Institute in Boston, and Dana-Farber Hospital is one of the best research and treatment centers for pediatric sarcomas in the country and possibly the world. We went there. She was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. Essentially, we're told that there was no cure for her cancer, and that the only hope that we would have for, any type of cure would be to put her cancer into remission until they could find a cure. So what was said to me at that point, what I heard and what my daughter heard and what our family heard, was that unless we find a cure for your daughter, she's going to die. And I did some research on the internet, and I understand, and I know research on the internet can sometimes be outdated.
Right.
But we had every mortality indicator with bone, that was presented to us. And on top of that, her 5-year survival rate for this type of cancer was 10%, which meant that there was a good chance, there was a 90% chance that within 5 years she was going to die. And we knew this, but she fought very gallantly.
Did she hear the news the same time you did?
Yes.
Or did the doctor share it with you in private ahead of time?
No, she shared it with us. She shared it with both of us at the same time. And, and my wife was also present as well. And I could see Janine, visibly starting to cry. And I had all I could do, and tears were rolling down her face. She got the news. She was told pretty much that unless there's a miracle, she's going to die. And I had heard the same thing. And ideally, that's not the way you want to present news to a family who's got a child with a terminal illness. And for a long time, I really processed that in terms of, geez, there had to have been a different way for the doctor to present it.
Right.
But 16 years puts gives me a lot of time to look back on that moment. And I think the doctor at that point did the best she could. I think she was just as upset as we were. And she presented the news as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And
Fair
then
enough.
she just 5 minutes, a 5-minute consult. And I think she was just as affected as we were, which is why she couldn't do more with us at that moment.
Right. But I think about, as a parent, our job is to protect our children. And when they're hurting, we want to surround them with love and tell them it's going to be okay. And in this case, you're getting that devastating news the same time your daughter is.
Oh, yeah. And
your
we were
processing it while your daughter is sitting there crying.
Yep. And literally, you could see the tears come down her face, and we're trying to process everything. And the hardest part was driving 5 hours home from Boston right after that.
Oh, my goodness.
And so we got in the car, and to this day, Linda, I don't even remember how we made the trip. Although I do know that every time that I hit a bump, she was in a lot of pain, which made my pain worse.
Mm.
And,
so if she had never injured her foot, at what point would it have been discovered, do you think?
That's a good question. What the doctors believed is that she activated some dormant cancer cells when she injured her foot, which then activated the cancer.
Okay.
And again, with sarcomas, they have to be caught so early, Linda, that if you don't catch them early, they're not treatable. And unfortunately, she had the most aggressive form of sarcoma that she could have. This was the one that was probably the least treatable.
Okay.
And we did 6 rounds. She did 6 very aggressive rounds of chemotherapy. Her cancer was in only 80% remission. The 20% of the cancer that was left remetastasized probably after the holidays. In January, we were given a prognosis of 1 to 3 months. Janine, in February, decided to terminate treatment. We called in hospice, and she was under hospice care for probably a little less than 10 days, and she died March 1st, 2003 at home.
Oh, my goodness. What was it like dealing with your fears? I can't imagine the fear that went through both your heart, but your wife's heart as well.
Well, and I've told my classes this. I've told, other individuals that I've spoken to, that first of all, my training as a therapist didn't even remotely prepare me for the path that was in front of me. At the moment, my fears were kind of delayed a little bit because I was focused so much on trying to help her address her cancer, so that my fears were kind of put on hold. Plus, she inspired me to not be afraid. One of the things that happened is when we first got home, I had been so upset because I tried driving slow, I tried driving fast, but every bump I hit, she screamed out in pain. And when I got home, she was sitting in the living room, and everybody was doing something else, and I just looked at her, and I collapsed right in her lap, and I just cried like a baby. And I told her that, I said, look, I said, I'm sorry that I caused you so much pain. I tried to do what I could so that we had a pain-free drive. And I just literally I lost it. I've not cried that much since, and I have not cried that much as I can remember. She looked at me, and this is when kind of my fear got put on hold. She looked at me and she said, Dad, if you can't sleep, if you're having trouble dealing with this, and I'm paraphrasing this, you come find me and we'll talk. She goes, I'm not going to give up without a fight. And so it was at that moment that her cancer taught me to be resilient. Even though she knew what she was facing, she was more concerned about me than her. And after that, I kind of figured if she could face what she was going through without fear, so could I. And,
wow. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So at what point did you feel like she stopped fighting? At what point, where was the turning point where you were fighting to beat this, to be one of the miracles, and realized you weren't going to be one of the miracle cases?
I don't know if there's any one. Well, I think there's probably one turning point that I can quote. And this was another thing for me, that Christmas was one of the more difficult holidays for me to deal with, because our last Christmas together was in December of 2002. And she bought a lot of gifts at that particular time for a lot of different people, for her brothers, for me, for her mother. And one of the things, we were sitting, and it seemed like we had these kind of turning point moments when nobody else was in the room. I was sitting on the floor in our family room. She was on the couch. She looked at me and she goes, Dad, I know that I did a lot for everybody during Christmas. She goes, but I did that because I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year. And I think at that point she knew. And I don't think it was ever a sense of her ever giving up, but I think she had accepted the fact that she had, that her treatment had gone as far as she could go. And she was just prepared, I think, as prepared as an 18-year-old could be to take that end of life journey. And
that's a lot to handle at that age. It's a lot to handle at any age. But, my heart goes out to you. We recently published a new book in the Grief Diary series called Surviving Loss by Cancer. We just published it earlier this month. And the stories in there by the people who shared their journeys, one of the common themes that I got out of it was that if their loved one felt like they were done fighting, there was no fight left in them, it's not uncommon for the survivors to feel a little bit angry, like you've got to fight more. Did you feel like that?
Honestly, I didn't. That was different for me. I had kind of known since we were told of her diagnosis that her time on Earth was going to be limited. But I can see where other families would experience that, because particularly, even though that, and there's only two outcomes with cancer, Linda. You're either going to live or you're going to die. There's no in between with this. And I think a lot of times, and I've talked to other families who've had cancer, who've had children die of cancer. It's just you want them to fight, and you may get angry because they're not fighting, because it's just the pain of losing them is just too much. And it isn't anger so much, I think, at the child or the loved one for not fighting. It's just that the fear, I think, that occurs, but that we're going to have to deal with a loss, and we're going to have to deal with this, and we try to delay that as much as possible. I myself, I never really thought that, but I knew right from the beginning that the chances for her survival were minimal. And so
So
I didn't go there.
the months that you had were almost bonus months.
Pretty much. I
Yeah.
think, we got 10 months, and we had a summer where the cancer treatments, the chemotherapy was working well, and she spent the summer with her friends, with her family, and
Oh,
it was
wow.
good to see her doing that. But then it just, with cancer, it's got to be 100% remission. If it isn't, there was 20% that was still left, and we kind of figured that eventually it was just going to remetastasize, and it did. It
Wow.
did.
And I think one of the hardest things with losing a loved one to cancer, and we talked about at the beginning before going live on the show that we weren't going to sugarcoat it, but the wasting away of watching our loved one waste away, the physical
Yep.
appearance of someone who is close to death
Yep.
versus what they look like when they were first diagnosed is just very drastic. And I think when you're with them day in and day out, you don't see it as much because
Yep.
you're with them during that slow decline. But what was that like for you to watch your daughter waste away from the cancer?
It was kind of like the grief before the actual grief,
Mm-hmm.
because I think with when you have a loved one who is fighting a cancer battle, you have grief on two levels. One, I kind of look at this as kind of like phenomenological loss, which is the loss of a part of the person that we knew, the loss of spirit, the loss of physical capability, the loss of autonomy, and also just especially with the loss of hair, just physically, emotionally, and spiritually, cancer ate away at my daughter on all three levels. So you grieve that loss before the actual loss, and then that gets into talking about anticipatory grief, which, as is the anticipating or knowing that your loved one is going to die, and trying to prepare for that. But knowing that someone's going to die doesn't prepare you for the emotional impact when they do. The anticipatory grief, from my perspective, helped me do the practical planning. Like I did the obituary about 2 days before she died. Um, you know, Picking out the burial plots, doing all the practical planning, making sure everything was in order. But trust me, when I witnessed her take her last breath, that the anticipatory grief didn't prepare me for the emotional impact of losing my daughter.
I'm so sorry. It is, my heart breaks for what that must have been like. Did she have a hand in preparing for her funeral and where she wanted, if she wanted to be cremated or buried, or
She really didn't have a say in her funeral. She'd wanted to write letters and do that kind of planning for a long time, but every time she tried to write letters, she just couldn't do it. And there's something that we call compartmentalizing, and this happens a lot, where on one hand she'd be talking about making plans to be married, and then on the other hand she'd be talking about her own mortality. So we were always looking at those two diametrically opposed realities. And I'm sorry, and I forgot the question.
no, that never happens to me.
No, I mean, the older I get, the more brain farts I have. But I look at that as a grateful part of aging.
It was just about how, whether Janine had a hand in her own funeral planning.
You know,
Sometimes people, with a terminal illness will take a proactive role
yeah,
in that. And
yeah,
there's some healing that takes place for the loved ones if that occurs.
yeah. That didn't occur in our case, but it was funny because I really felt that one of the things that happened is she was guiding the whole process after she died. Because as much shock as I was after her death, I was able to pick out a funeral song, which was a Leanne Womack song, "I Hope You Dance," and that was how I ended her obituary. And that just came out of, at the time, nowhere. And I also did her eulogy. I also said a few words at her funeral, and the typing was kind of like what was coming through me as I look back on this now. So I think immediately after her death, she was somehow guiding the process. And so I think she had a plan after. And this is, and at the time, I didn't really recognize this until probably 10 years after she died. I looked back on what happened in the beginning. I said, how did I get through this? I got through it because Janine's spirit helped me get through that.
And so, have you had contact with her since her passing?
Oh yeah, there's been, I've had contact with her. There's been a lot of different signs that I've received from her. I've gotten heart-shaped signs right around the week of her angelversary or death anniversary date, however you choose to conceptualize that. There's a lot of times I see the numbers 3 and 1 that will pop up randomly, which March 1st was her date of death,
Yeah.
her month and day of death. There are other times that we share the love of music together. There would be times that I'd be thinking about her and her song on the radio would come through. So she was there, and also she has chosen to come through through select mediums that I know, where I will get messages. So she's come through in a variety of different ways. So that tells me that not only do we have our loved ones have the capability to communicate their presence and tell us they're okay, but also we can use that knowledge to continue a bond or a relationship with their spirit after they die.
You know, our daughter Allie, who passed in 2009, she has come through, plenty of times, and it's been very healing, actually, for me.
Yep.
And so I would imagine that is the same for you as well.
It is, and I think in the beginning it's kind of bittersweet because when we get a sign from our loved one, it's like, wow, this is great. We acknowledge it, but at the same time, it's a reminder that they're not physically present, and so there's kind of that bittersweet. For me, there was that bittersweet reaction. Now, 16 years later, the sign that I get from my daughter signals that our relationship is not only ongoing, but it also reminds me not so much of what I've lost, but what I have now, which is a relationship which is different, a bond which is different, but it's still very strong and very pure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so if you could go back and change anything aside from her death, is there anything that you would have done differently? What words of advice do you have for somebody who is losing a loved one to cancer?
And I played this scenario out in my head so many times. One of the things I always question myself, and you mentioned earlier in the show about as parents, our job is to protect our loved ones. And one of the things I struggled with for a long time was, did I do enough to protect my daughter? Could I have seen her cancer signs sooner? Could I have convinced her to do one more clinical trial? And I replayed that over and over and over. And the advice that I gave myself is that, Dave, you did the best that you could given the hand of cards you were dealt for you. It wasn't, Janine lived her life on her own terms and she died on her own terms. She did not want to go through any extensive treatment in Boston. She chose to do her treatment locally. She wanted to spend her time with her family. She made those decisions. She was 18 years old at the time, so she could make that, she could make those choices. She could make those choices. So that's what she opted to do. And it turned out, as I've learned in the years passing, it wasn't my job to protect her as much as it was my job to allow her to make adult decisions. And it took me about 10 years of a lot of intensive work, internal work, a lot of support that I've gotten from a lot of different individuals, a lot of wise spiritual advisors that have helped me get to that point to realize that, there was many more layers to this that could not be explained by human law.
Yeah. Wow. Profound. And so how have you changed in these years since 2003?
Wow. How much time do we have?
We don't have a limit.
I understand that. Well, let's see. First of all, my background was in psychology. So prior to Janine's death, I did not believe in after-death communication. I did not believe in any metaphysical phenomena. I didn't believe in any of that. I was a psychologist who specifically dealt in observable behavior. If I couldn't see it, if I couldn't feel it, if I couldn't experience it with my own senses, it didn't exist. I really rejected spirituality when I was younger, and a lot, as I came to find out, and this gets into kind of some other metaphysical experiences. I work with a shamanistic holistic practitioner. I've been working with her for a few years, and in the course of her journey, me journeying with her and doing some work, she had discovered that in another existence, in another existence of my soul, that I was hung because of my spiritual knowledge. So it's quite possible that I came into this lifetime rejecting it because of the need to protect myself
Right.
from what had happened earlier. But then after Janine died, I started getting these signs almost immediately from her. And it's like when they say when one person tells you you've got an issue with something, you kind of dismiss it. But when 7 people tell you got an issue, you listen to it. I started getting all of these signs in kind of rapid fire fashion a few months after she died, as if she was saying, Dad, wake up. She goes, you need to embrace this part of your. So I did. And I gradually went from acknowledging signs to accepting after death communication to looking at after death communication as a way that we can develop a strong and more lasting relationship with our loved ones after they die. So my philosophy now kind of merges psychology with spirituality. It's kind of that merge of both, where I take a look at non-ordinary phenomena and see how that also can shape behavior and put behavior in proper context.
That's really interesting because I know, researchers and such and those in the science fields, to talk about spirituality, life after death, religion even sometimes is considered career. I hate to use the word suicide, but that's what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
To career suicide, to acknowledge something that can't be proven. And so have you, because Janine's death put you on this path of spirituality, coming full circle, did that present any problems with your colleagues in the psychology department?
Nope, not a thing. One of the nice thing about working where I work is that, my curriculum isn't micromanaged. My colleagues are very aware of some of my beliefs. And in fact, they support that. And they may not believe it totally. They may not buy into it totally, but they support it, which is the other piece I talk about. What has changed for me is I have been more compassionate and more open to other perspectives, even though I may not understand them. I may not totally agree with them, but by witnessing as opposed to judging, I can take some of those pieces that may apply to me and kind of fit it in a way that makes sense for me. So I've learned that it's what you believe. It's not, right. And as long as what you believe is not hurting yourself, it's not hurting anybody else, it's all good. I can witness faith-based, I can witness any other type of belief system, without necessarily agreeing with it, but yet honoring it and acknowledging it. Yeah. And I think that's the other part of me that's changed, is I've been more open to different things. And obviously the small, I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. What used to be a crisis, if I when I was working full time and somebody called into work and I had to pick up their slack, that was nothing. It used to be a crisis to me before my daughter died. Didn't even qualify as a minor inconvenience. Right. And the other thing is I've embraced, I think, more sacred law perspectives, and have made a conscious choice to change my perspective on how I look. I've looked at my daughter's life and I've looked at her death. An example of this, I had told a friend of mine that I was the last person to see my daughter alive on March 1st. And she said, well, why don't you look at it as being the first person to usher your daughter into her new life?
Wow.
And I love that. Yeah, me too. And essentially, maybe that would, how we talk about, like sometimes people, the loved ones will die with either alone or with certain people at their bedside. I was the last one to take her hand. I witnessed her last breaths and I witnessed her death. But what I began to learn after my conversation with my friend is that I witnessed her rebirth into a new existence. And I was chosen by the universe, by my daughter, to have that happen.
That's beautiful. And I love how you phrased that. I think that that is, it's a wonderful way to look at things. And I know not everyone would agree with us, but, this is life. And, we can take from it what the collateral blessings are.
Yep.
And, move forward with that understanding that, because the truth is that in many cases, losing a loved one helps us become a better person.
Yes.
And, to see the blessings that come from it, they're it's the hardest pain known to mankind, to lose a loved one, especially a child.
Yes.
But at times, it comes with blessings that help mold us into a better version of ourselves. And that is a blessing in and of itself. So my final question to you is, what is your definition of hope?
Wow. I think for me, hope is having the capacity to look at life differently after catastrophic loss and come to a point of acceptance of the fact that your life is what it is without the presence of your child or your loved ones. But at the same time, understanding that we still are going to have the physical yearnings for the presence of our loved ones, and we need to honor that as well too. So hope is being able to take a catastrophic loss and shape it, and develop a new perspective as a result of what's happened, while still having the yearnings that we're going to have for the presence of our loved ones. And even though I've come to a point of acceptance in my life with my daughter's death, that doesn't mean I still don't yearn for her physical presence. It doesn't mean that days I wake up and I experience that, that extreme sadness.
Yeah.
That still happens to me, but I recognize that this is part of my life as it stands now, and that, and grief is about experiencing all of it. It's about experiencing in the aftermath the joyful moments, the sadness, the anger, the yearning, because we can learn from all of it. To deny that, we deny a good part of our existence after loss.
Well said. Well said. And I believe that the heart can hold joy the same time as sorrow.
Yeah.
And when you're in the early phases of loss, it feels like life will never be beautiful again. It feels like, the death of your loved one has robbed the technicolor from your world.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine that joy and beauty will return to your world. But with time, the rawness softens, our coping skills strengthen, and we learn that the heart holds joy the same time as sorrow.
Yep.
And I think that is, what I want to tell viewers, those that are struggling with loss of a loved one, no matter how they passed, is to just hang on. And over time, the beauty will return to your world, and you will learn to move forward with that, sadness in your heart, but also make room for joy.
And we carry both joy and sadness at the same time. And life, even without loss, is still it's just not all about joy. It's about sadness. Right. It's about challenge. It's about disappointment. And to deny those parts of our existence is to deny a good part of our existence. And that's the other thing that I've learned, is we have to embrace those qualities that society thinks are not productive, are not functional. We have to, to honor sadness. We have to honor anger, because there are gifts in that. There are gifts in our sadness, or even gifts in our anger, as long as our anger isn't destructive, and we can kind of learn. There are teachings from everything.
That's right. And you think about it, the way that the universe works is that, not every day is summer. When we go through seasons of fall losing their leaves, winter, everything looks dead, but under the surface, there's a lot of growth happening. And you don't see that growth until spring comes around. Yep. And I think, grief can be like that, where it appears that our world is just, again, robbed of all technicolor. And yet that's when we're doing the most soul growth.
Mm-hmm. So, exactly. It's during the time of challenge that our soul grows, I think, the most.
Yeah. We don't learn from the easy stuff. I wish we did.
I wish there was another way that I could have achieved spiritual growth and awareness other than the death of my daughter, but there wasn't. I wish there could have been another way, but it just wasn't destined for me in this lifetime to have that happen.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. How can our viewers contact you if they have any questions? And I know, just to tell our viewers that Dave, we talked about having him back on the show again to talk about life after death and reincarnation and going down that path and exploring that. So we'll do that after the holidays. But in the meantime, Dave, how can people reach you?
They could reach me on Facebook. I'm very easy to find.
Okay.
They can reach me at Facebook. They can message me. I'm even open to friend requests as long as they have mutual friends that I know. They can reach me by email, which is bootsyandangel@gmail.com. They can also go to my website, which is www.bootsyandangel.com. And so those are probably the three ways that almost immediately they can reach me. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. And to all of our viewers, you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you right here next week. All right. Take care, everyone.